Hi, welcome to Mr. Hunter's book reading. This is the follow-up book to the City of Ember, titled The People of Spark by Jean Dupro. And there is a quote in the beginning of this book I'm going to read, and it is a very famous quote, one of my favorites. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence, and toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. Martin Luther King Jr. said that in a speech called Strength to Love in 1963. The People of Spark. The Message. Dear people of Ember, we came down the river from the pipeworks and found the way to another place. It is green here and very big. Light comes from the sky. You must follow the instructions in this message and come on the river. Bring food with you. Come as quickly as you can. Lena Mayfleet and Dune Harrow. So that was a part of the book. That's just before the story. Part 1. The Arrival. Chapter 1. What Torren Saw. Torren was out at the edge of the cabbage field that day, the day the people came. He was supposed to be fetching a couple of cabbages for Dr. Hester to use in the soup that night, but, as usual, he didn't see why he shouldn't have some fun while he was at it. So he climbed up the wind tower, which wasn't supposed to do because, they said, he might fall or get his head sliced off by one of the big blades going round and round. The wind tower was four-sided, made of boards, nailed one above the next, like rungs on a ladder. Torren climbed the back side of it, and the side that faced the hills and not the village, so that the little group of workers hoeing the cabbage rows wouldn't see him. At the top, he turned round and sat on the flat place behind the blades, which turned slowly in the idle summer breeze. He had brought a pocket full of small stones up with him, planning on some target practice. He liked to try to hit the chickens that rummaged around between the rows of cabbages. He thought it might be fun to bounce the pebbles off the hats of the workers, too. But before he had even taken the stones from his pocket, he caught sight of something that made him stop and stare. Out beyond the cabbage fields was another field, where young tomato and corn and squash plants were growing, and beyond that the land sloped up into a grassy hillside dotted at this time of year with yellow mustard flowers. Torren saw something strange at the top of the hill, something dark. There were bits of darkness at first. For a second he thought maybe it was a deer or several deer, black ones instead of the usual light brown, but the shape was wrong for deer, and the way these things moved was wrong too. He realized very soon that he was seeing people. A few people at first, and then more and more of them. They came up from the other side of the hill and gathered at the top and stood there. A long line of them against the sky, like a row of black teeth. There must have been 100, Torren thought, or more than 100. In all his life, Torren had never seen more than 3 or 4 people at a time arrive at a village from elsewhere. Almost always the people who came were roamers, passing through with a truckload of stuff from their old towns to sell. This massing of people on the hilltop terrified him. For a moment he couldn't move. Then his heart started up a furious pounding and scrambled down off the wind tower so fast he scraped his hands on the rough boards. "Someone's coming," he shouted as he passed the workers. They looked up, startled. Torren ran at full speed toward the low cluster of brown buildings at the far end of the field. He turned up the dirt lane, his feet raising swirls of dust, and dashed through the gate in the wall and across the courtyard and in through the open door at all the time yelling, "Someone's coming! Up on the hill! Auntie Esther! Someone's coming!" He found his aunt in the kitchen and grabbed her by the waist of her pants and cried, "Someone, come see! There are people on the hill!" His voice was so shrill and urgent and loud that his aunt dropped the spoon into the pot of the soup she'd been stirring and hurried after him. By the time they got outside, others in the village were leaving their houses too and looking toward the hillside. The people were coming down. Over the crest of the hill, they came and kept coming, dozens of them, more and more, like a mudslide. The people of the village crowded into the streets. "Get Mary Water," someone called. "Where's Ben and Wilmer? Find them. Tell them they get out here." Torren was less frightened now that he was surrounded by the townspeople. "I saw them first," he said to Hattie Carranza, who happened to be hurrying along next to him. "I was the one who told the news." "Is that right?" said Hattie. "We won't let them do anything bad to us," said Torren. "If they do, we'll do something worse to them, won't we?" But she just glanced down at him with a vague frown and didn't answer. The three village leaders, Mary Waters, Ben Barlow, and Wilmer Dent, had joined the crowd by now and were leading the way across the cabbage field. Torren kept close behind them. The strangers were getting nearer, and he wanted to hear what they would say. He could see that they were terrible-looking people. Their clothes were all wrong, coats and sweaters, though the weather was warm. Not nice coats and sweaters, but raggedy ones, patched and unraveling, faded and grimy. They carried bundles, all of them, sacks made of what looked like tablecloths or blankets gathered up and tied with a string around the neck. They moved clumsily and slowly. Some of them tripped on the uneven ground and had to be helped up by others. In the center of the field, where the smell of new cabbages and fresh dirt and chicken manure was strong, those at the front of the crowd of strangers met the village leaders. Mary Waters stepped to the front, and the villagers crowded up behind her. Torren, being small, wriggled between people until he had a good view. He stared at the ragged people. Where were their leaders? Facing Mary were a girl and a boy who looked only a little older than he was himself. Next to them was a bald man, and next to him, a sharp-eyed woman holding a small child. Maybe she was the leader. But when Mary stepped forward and said, "Who are you?" it was the boy who answered. He spoke in a clear, loud voice that surprised Torren, who had expected a pitiful voice from someone so bedraggled. "We come from the City of Ember," the boy said. "We left there because our city was dying. We need help." Mary, Ben, and Wilmer exchanged glances, and Mary frowned. "The City of Ember? Where's that? We've never heard of it." The boy gestured back the way they had come, to the east. "That way," he said. "It's under the ground." The frowns deepened. "Tell us the truth," said Ben, "not childish nonsense." This time the girl spoke up. She had long, snarled hair with bits of grass caught in it. "It isn't a lie," she said. "Really, our city was underground. We didn't know until we came out." Ben snorted impatiently, folding his arms across his chest. "Who is in charge here?" He looked at the bald man. "Is it you?" The bald man shook his head and gestured toward the boy and the girl. "They're as in charge as anyone," he said. "The mayor of our city is no longer with us. These young people are speaking the truth. We have come out of the city, out of the ground, a city that was built underground." The people around them all nodded and murmured, Yes, it's true, it's true." "My name is Dune Harrow," said the boy, "and this is Lena Mayfleet. We found the way out of Ember." "He thinks he's pretty great," thought Torren, hearing a note of pride in the boy's voice. He didn't look so great. His hair was shaggy, and he was wearing an old jacket that was coming apart at the seams and grimy at the cuffs. But his eyes shone out confidently from under his dark eyebrows. "We're hungry," the boy said, "and thirsty. Will you help us?" Mary, Ben, and Wilmer stood silent for a moment. Then Mary took Ben and Wilmer by the arms and led them aside a few steps. They whispered to each other, glanced up at the great swarm of strangers, frowned, and whispered some more. While he waited to hear what they'd say, Torren studied the people who'd said they came from underground. Might be true. They did, in fact, look as if they had crawled up out of a hole. Most of them were scrawny and pale, like the sprouts you see when you lift up the boards. that had been lying on the ground. Feeble things that have tried to grow in the dark. They huddled together, looking frightened. They looked exhausted, too. Many of them had sat on the ground now, and some had their heads in their laps of others. 3 village leaders turned again to the crowd of strangers. "How many of you are there?" Mary Waters asked. "About 400, said the boy, Doone. Mary's dark eyebrows jumped upward. 400? In Torren's whole village, there were only 322. He swept his glance out over the vast horde. They filled half the cabbage field and were still coming up over the hill like a swarm of ants. The girl with the ratty hair stepped forward and raised a hand, as if she were in school. "Excuse me, Madam Mayor," she said. Torren snickered. "Madam Mayor? Nobody called Mary Waters Madam Mayor. They just called her Mary." "Madam Mayor," said the girl. "My little sister is very sick." She pointed to the baby being held by the sharp-eyed woman. It did look sick. Its eyes were half closed, and its mouth hung open. "Some others of us are sick, too," the girl went on, "or hurt. Lottie Hoover tripped and hurt her ankle, and Nanny Proggs is exhausted from walking so far. She's nearly 80 years old. Is there a doctor in your town? Is there a place where sick people can lie down and be taken care of?" Mary turned to Ben and Wilmer again, and they spoke to each other in low voices. Torren could catch only a few words of what they said. "Too many. But human kindness. Maybe take a few in." Ben rubbed his beard and scowled. Wilmer kept glancing at the sick baby. After a few minutes, they nodded to each other, and Mary said, "All right, hoist me up." Ben and Wilmer bent down and grasped Mary's legs. With a grunt, they lifted her so that she was high enough to see the crowd out ahead of her. She raised both her arms and cried in a voice that came from the depths of her chest, "People of Ember, welcome. We will do what we can to help you. Please follow us." Ben and Wilmer set her down, and the 3 of them turned and walked out of the cabbage field and toward the road that entered the village. Led by the boy and the girl, the crowd of shabby people followed. Torren dashed ahead, ran down the lane, and got up onto the low wall that bordered his house. From there he watched the people from underground go by. They were strangely silent. Why weren't they jabbering to each other? But they seemed too tired to speak, or too stupid. They stared at everything, wide-eyed and drop-jawed, as if they had never seen a house before, or a tree, or a chicken. In fact, chickens seemed to be frightened of them. They shrank back when they saw them, making startled sounds. It took a long time for the whole raggedy crowd to pass Torren's house. And when the last people had gone by, he jumped down off the wall and followed them. They were being led, he knew, to the town center by the river, where there would be water for them to drink. After that, what would happen? What would they eat? Where would they sleep? Not in my room, he thought. That's the end of chapter 1.